There are stories that begin with a great event, an accident, a loss, a visible tragedy. But not this one. This story begins in a far more cruel way. It begins when nothing happens, when someone does everything right and the world responds with silence. Because life rarely warns you when it is going to be unfair. It simply is, without explanations, without apologies. This is a story about someone who learned very early on that character is not something the world automatically recognizes. It is something the world tests in silence, in the absence of applause, in indifference. There are no easy promises here. There are no shortcuts. There is no sudden luck. There is effort that no one sees, pain that does not become a spectacle, and moral choices made when it would be easier to give up. Throughout this journey, you will follow a life marked by absences, by deprivation, by humiliations that left no marks on the body, but left deep scars on the soul. You will see someone being pushed down, not for mistakes, but for existing in a place where they were not supposed to exist, for occupying a space that made others uncomfortable, for maintaining dignity when submission was expected. This story does not shout, it whispers, and that is exactly why it hurts so much. Perhaps at some point, you will recognize yourself. Perhaps you will realize that you have already been in the place of someone who did the best they could with the little they had and was still ignored. Perhaps you will remember moments when silence was your only defense. If that happens, it is not a coincidence, because this story is not about extraordinary feats. It is about ordinary people facing circumstances that no one should have to face alone. It is about continuing when giving up seems more logical. It is about not becoming corrupted when the world offers easy shortcuts. It is about carrying values even when they seem to have no value at all. The story you are about to hear does not promise immediate justice, but it promises truth, and perhaps, just perhaps, it is far too similar to your own story. Today, Sarah is someone who would hardly be chosen as a protagonist at first glance. She does not enter a place and change the atmosphere. She does not impose her presence. She does not demand attention. Most of the time, she is simply noticed later. Sarah walks with firm but restrained steps, like someone who learned that taking up too much space can attract trouble. Her movements are precise, economical. There is no rush, but there is also no distraction. She does what needs to be done and does it well, without fanfare. There is something in the way she observes the world that reveals a life of silent vigilance. Sarah notices people, the tones of voice, the glances that drift away, the gestures that seem small but carry great intentions. She learned to read environments before positioning herself within them. She learned that understanding the mood of a place can be more important than understanding the written rules. When she speaks, she chooses her words carefully, not because she is afraid of making mistakes, but because she knows the weight a poorly placed word can carry for someone who has no margin for error. Sarah is dedicated, but not in the romantic sense of the word. She does not believe that effort will always be rewarded. She believes that effort is a way of preserving one's own dignity. She carries out tasks as someone honoring a silent agreement with herself. I will do my part, regardless of what the world does with it. There are days when she arrives early, days when she leaves late, days when she notices problems before they become visible, and almost no one notices. Not because she is invisible, but because the world rarely looks at those who work in silence. Sarah's strength did not come from privilege. She did not inherit connections. She did not have doors opened by a last name, status, or social appearance. She had no one to soften her falls or justify her mistakes. Everything she built was born of necessity. There is a maturity in her that does not match her age, a caution that does not come from insecurity, but from early experience, as if life had demanded an adult posture from her ahead of time. Sarah trusts little, not out of cynicism, but out of learning. She learned that promises are often made easily and fulfilled rarely, that praise can hide intentions, that kindness at times charges high interest. Even so, she did not become bitter. There is something deeply human in Sarah, a silent refusal to become as hard as the world that tested her. She feels deeply, but she chose not to turn pain into noise. When something hurts her, she does not explode. She gathers herself, processes it, and moves on. This posture does not make her weak, but it makes her lonely, because those who carry everything in silence are rarely understood and almost never defended. Sarah still does not know where this way of existing will lead her. She does not make grand plans. She does not dream of applause. She dreams of stability, of simple justice, of the possibility of living without always being on alert. And without realizing it, it is precisely this combination, silence, constancy, and character, that begins to trace the path that life, sooner or later, will place before her. For now, however, Sarah continues to be just someone who does what needs to be done, without knowing that soon this silence will be tested in a way she never imagined. Before Sarah learned to be silent, someone taught her without words. Her father was named Marcos. Marcos was a simple man, shaped by a life that never offered him easy choices. He worked hard, carried too many responsibilities, and spoke too little. He was not cruel in an explicit sense. He did not shout, he did not hit, he did not humiliate, but he also did not nurture. His presence was physical, never emotional. He came home tired, always tired. He would sit in silence, with a distant gaze, like someone who was there only out of obligation. To Sarah, still very young, this was confusing. She did not understand why her father was so close and at the same time so far away. There were no conversations before bedtime. There was no praise. There was no lap to crawl into. There was only the constant feeling that she needed to behave well so as not to be a burden. Over time, distance turned into absence. Marcos became less present, less involved, less interested, until one day he simply left. There was no argument, there was no explanation, there was no promise of return. He left and did not come back. For Sarah, what hurt was not only the abandonment, it was the silence that came with it, the absence of answers, the feeling that she did not even deserve an explanation. She spent years trying to understand what she had done wrong, trying to find within herself the reason for that emptiness. This was Sarah's first trauma, a rejection that does not scream, but echoes. The mother stayed. Her name was Anna. Anna had no time to rebel. Life did not allow it. The day after the abandonment, there were already bills to pay, food to put on the table, a roof to protect them. Grief was swallowed by necessity. She worked wherever work appeared. She cleaned houses, ironed clothes, worked long shifts, accepted poorly paid jobs. She came home exhausted, with a heavy body and tired eyes, but never empty ones. Anna took everything on herself: the financial support, the upbringing, the emotional responsibility. She was not a woman of many words. She did not know how to explain love. She did not know how to talk about feelings, but she showed it every day, in her body, in her effort, in her renunciation. There were nights when she arrived so tired she could barely stand. Even so, she prepared food for Sarah, and when the food was scarce, she made sure to serve her daughter's plate first. "I already ate at work," she would say, even when she had eaten nothing at all. Sarah grew up watching her mother slowly fade so that she herself could remain a light. Anna protected her daughter from everything she could, from the cold, from the hunger, from the fear. But she could not protect her from the absence of her father, nor from the constant sense of insecurity that absence left behind. This extreme protection created a deep bond between the two, a silent dependency. Sarah learned early that she needed to be strong not only for herself, but for her mother as well. She did not cry so not to worry her. She did not complain so not to weigh her. She did not ask so not to lack. The love between them was not spoken, it was lived. And it was in this environment of paternal absence and maternal sacrifice that Sarah began to take shape. She learned that people can leave without explanation, that those who stay often pay the price alone, and that loving, at times, means enduring in silence. Without realizing it, Sarah began to build within herself the same posture as her mother: to endure, to resist, to go on. Sarah's origin was not marked by security, it was marked by survival. And everything she would later become, her caution, her contained strength, her silence, was born exactly there, in the small house, in the shared plate, in the father who left without looking back, and in the mother who stayed, even when staying meant losing a little of herself every day. The house where Sarah grew up was never just a house. It was a provisional place. Not because anyone said it out loud, but because everything there seemed about to end. The walls were simple, the floor cold, the furniture scarce and old. Nothing matched. Everything had come from somewhere else, from some donation, from some better time that no longer existed. It was a house that did not offer security. It offered temporary shelter. Anna did everything she could so that Sarah would not notice, but financial instability was everywhere. In the envelopes stacked on the table, in the notes left on the door, in the phone calls answered in a low voice, in the heavy silence that took over the house whenever the end of the month approached. The mortgage was a constant shadow. It was not discussed, but it was felt. Sarah did not fully understand what it meant to lose a house, but she understood her mother's fear when she looked around, as if she were already saying goodbye to each wall in advance. There were nights when Anna sat at the table, staring at numbers that never added up. She did the calculations over and over, as if persistence could change the outcome. Sometimes she ran a hand over her face, took a deep breath, and started again. She did not cry. She did not allow herself to. Sarah watched from a distance. She learned early that some fears do not need to be explained to be understood. The idea of losing their home was never presented to Sarah as a concrete possibility. But she grew up feeling that nothing was guaranteed, that everything could be taken away, that everything depended on constant effort. That changes a child. While other children saw their homes as something fixed, unchangeable, Sarah saw the house as something that needed to be defended daily, as if each day were a silent test of permanence. The fear did not come in the form of panic, it came in the form of caution. She avoided asking for things, she avoided complaining, she avoided taking up too much space. There were days when there was enough food, and there were days when there was not. On good days, Anna cooked something simple and called Sarah to eat. On bad days, she improvised. She stretched what she had, reduced portions, invented justifications. "Eat slowly," she would say. "It's good for digestion." Sarah obeyed, without knowing that this advice was in fact a strategy. There were nights when Sarah went to sleep with an empty stomach, without fully understanding why. It was not explicit hunger, it was a vague sense of lack, a silent discomfort she learned to ignore. Anna said she had already eaten. She always said it. Sarah would only discover years later that this was almost never true. Her mother skipped meals so that she could eat, not as a dramatic gesture, but as routine, as habit, as an automatic choice. This kind of sacrifice does not come with speeches. It happens in silence, in details, in repetition. And that is precisely why it leaves such deep marks. Sarah grew up watching her mother become smaller so that she could grow. She saw clothes being worn to their limit, shoes being repaired multiple times, objects being reused beyond what was reasonable. And even so, Anna never allowed dignity to be negotiated. The house was simple but clean. The clothes were worn but cared for. There was a constant concern about not appearing too poor, not out of shame, but out of survival. Because appearing weak, Anna knew, attracted exploitation. Sarah absorbed this. She learned to observe before acting. She learned to measure her words. She learned to feel the environment. But above all, she learned empathy. Empathy not as a beautiful concept, but as the natural reflex of someone who knows lack. Sarah noticed her mother's exhaustion. She noticed when Anna pretended to be fine. She noticed when the silence lasted longer than usual. And without anyone asking, she began to adapt. She did not ask for gifts. She did not demand attention. She did not complain about having little. When she saw her mother tired, she withdrew. When she sensed tension, she stayed quiet. When she noticed worry, she tried to be light. Sarah began taking care of her mother without knowing she was doing it. This reversal of roles happens silently. There is no announcement. There is no conscious decision. The child simply assumes emotional responsibilities that should not be theirs. She began to measure her own impact on her mother's life. She began to ask herself, even without words, "Am I a burden?" That question was never spoken, but it shaped everything. Sarah's childhood was not marked by grand visible tragedies. It was marked by small daily renunciations, by constant adjustments, by permanent emotional vigilance. She did not grow up rebellious, she grew up careful. And that has a cost. Because children who learn too early how to adapt often grow up without knowing exactly what they want. They only know what they cannot ask for. Poverty did not take comfort from Sarah alone. It took spontaneity. It took lightness. It took the sense of basic security. But it left something in return. It left a deep capacity to perceive others, to understand another's pain without explanations, to respect invisible boundaries. Sarah's empathy was not born from taught kindness. It was born from lived necessity. And without her realizing it, this childhood marked by scarcity was preparing something greater. Not an easy victory, not a grand destiny,
but an internal structure that would be tested in much harsher ways in the future. Because those who grow up learning to survive in silence will one day or the other be placed in situations where that silence will be misunderstood for weakness. And life was not yet finished teaching that to Sarah.
Sarah's childhood was not marked by great visible tragedies. There was no single dramatic event that could be pointed to as the moment everything went wrong. What existed was something more silent, more corrosive, and therefore more enduring. Everyday humiliation. Small, repeated, normalized. Sarah was a poor child in an environment that, although not explicitly hostile, was never welcoming. From a very early age, she realized that there was something about her that placed her on the margins, even without fully understanding what it was. It was not her personality, it was not her behavior, it was what she did not have. The clothes she wore were always simple. They were not dirty, they were not torn, but they carried the weight of time. They were reused clothes, inherited, adjusted by her mother with care and effort. While other children arrived wearing new sneakers, colorful backpacks, and clothes that followed current trends, Sarah arrived with what was possible. And in that environment, what was possible was never enough. Her school supplies revealed her condition before she even opened her mouth. Pencils that were too short, worn erasers, incomplete notebooks, covers without popular characters. None of this was said directly, but everything was noticed. The lingering looks, the silent comparisons, the whispers that stopped when she came closer. Some humiliations came in the form of words, comments that seemed innocent but were loaded with disguised cruelty. Does that pencil still write? Why is your backpack so old? You're not bringing a snack again today? Others came in the form of absence. Sarah was not invited to parties. She was not chosen first for group projects. She was not included in the most sought-after games. Not because she was undesirable as a person, but because her presence reminded others of something uncomfortable: inequality. She began to understand, still very young, that belonging had a price, and that price was not effort, nor character, nor kindness. It was money. Little by little, a painful awareness formed within her that her mere existence caused discomfort in certain environments. Sarah began to measure her gestures, her words, even her breathing. She learned to take up less space, to speak more softly, to ask for less, to expect less. Each silent exclusion taught something. Each sideways comment left a mark. Each muffled laugh built an invisible wall between her and the rest of the world. And the cruelest part of all was that no one seemed to notice. For the adults, it was just kids being kids. For Sarah, it was the daily construction of an identity based on lack. It was during this period that her first real awareness of not belonging emerged, not as an elaborate concept, but as a constant feeling, a discomfort that accompanied her even when she was silent, even when she was not being directly attacked. She knew, she always knew, she was not like the others. And in order to survive emotionally, Sarah developed a skill that would become central to her life: enduring in silence. She learned not to react, not to cry in front of others, to swallow the knot in her throat, to smile when the most honest response would have been to shrink away. Not because she was strong, but because she understood that expressing suffering only created more exposure, more comments, more looks. This learning was involuntary. No one sat down with her to explain it. No one said that this silence would have consequences. But day after day, Sarah was trained to believe that expressing suffering was dangerous, that complaining changed nothing, that speaking only made things worse. School, which should have been a place of discovery and growth, became a territory of emotional vigilance.
Sarah observed everything, the dynamics, the hierarchies, who was respected, who was ignored. She learned early how to read the environment, how to anticipate reactions, how to protect herself before an attack even came. This constant state of alert shaped her personality. It made her observant, cautious, introspective. While other children experienced the world with spontaneity, Sarah did so with strategy. Every step was calculated, every word measured. And still, despite all the pain, something silent was also being built within her. A rare sensitivity, a deep empathy, because those who suffer exclusion learn to recognize pain in others more easily. Sarah noticed those who were also left out, those who also spoke little, those who were also ignored. But even that empathy she kept to herself. There was no room for heroic gestures, only for survival. By the end of this phase, Sarah was not just a poor child. She was a child who had learned that the world was not fair, but also that it did not care to explain that. She had understood that some pains do not create scandals. They do not bring rescue. They simply shape. And so, without realizing it, Sarah left childhood carrying something that would accompany her for many years. The silent conviction that her strength was not in being seen, but in resisting without being noticed. That was the cruelest lesson of her childhood, and also the most enduring.
Amid so many absences, there was something that never lacked in Sarah's life: curiosity. She did not know how to name it as a child, but she felt it, a silent restlessness, an almost instinctive desire to understand the world beyond what her eyes could reach. While the reality around her insisted on reminding her of what she lacked, learning offered something rare: possibilities. Sarah's interest in studying did not arise as a clear ambition for social ascent. It was not, at first, a conscious plan to change her life. It was simpler and at the same time deeper. Studying was the only place where she was not constantly compared, diminished, or excluded. In front of an open notebook, everyone began from the same point: the blank page. In the classroom, when the teacher explained a new topic, Sarah listened with an attention few noticed, not because she wanted to stand out, but because there, in that moment, her origin did not matter. What mattered was understanding, solving, connecting ideas. Each concept learned functioned as a small shelter against the external chaos. But her genuine interest in learning inevitably ran up against the lack of money. New books were a distant luxury. While some classmates showed off newly purchased materials, still smelling of fresh paper, Sarah depended on what the school provided, and often that was not enough. Libraries were limited, copies were disputed, and the desire to learn more always came accompanied by a silent frustration: the lack of access. She wanted to go deeper, to go beyond the basics, but she knew asking was difficult. Every request to her mother carried guilt. Sarah saw the fatigue in her eyes, the marked hands, the exhausted body, an entire life being consumed to maintain the minimum. So many times she preferred to stay quiet, to store the desire away, to pretend that what she had was enough. Her mother, however, saw what Sarah did not say. She noticed the contained sparkle when her daughter spoke about a new subject. She observed how Sarah reread the same texts, underlining carefully, trying to extract more than those pages could offer. And even without resources, she decided that this would not be taken from her daughter. Buying used books became an extreme sacrifice. It was not a simple decision. Each book meant giving up something essential. Sometimes it was better food that week. Other times it was repairing something broken at home. Her mother visited second-hand bookstores, fairs, bazaars. She looked for old editions, worn covers, yellowed pages.
Appearance did not matter, content did. When she arrived home with a new book, the gesture was not accompanied by speeches. There were no motivational phrases, just the silent delivery. A simple object, but loaded with meaning. Sarah received those books as one receives a treasure. She ran her hand over the cover, opened it slowly, felt its weight. Each book represented more than knowledge. It was concrete proof that someone believed in her. These books became symbols of hope, not in an idealized sense, but a real one. They were confirmation that the future did not have to be an exact repetition of the past, that other possible worlds existed, even if, for now, they could only be accessed through words. Sarah read anywhere, in the small bedroom, at the kitchen table, at night when silence finally took over the house. She read with almost reverent attention. Each paragraph absorbed seemed to expand her inner limits. She learned vocabulary, ideas, stories, concepts that were not part of her immediate daily life, but that broadened her view of herself. Studying became more than a school activity. It became a tool of escape, a legitimate refuge. While the external world reinforced her limitations, studying offered a space where she could exist without labels. There, she was not the poor girl. She was the focused student, the dedicated reader, the curious mind. But at the same time, studying also became a bridge to the future. Even though Sarah did not know exactly where she would arrive, she sensed that learning was a way of preparing for something greater, something different. Each page read was like a brick quietly placed in the construction of an exit. There were nights when physical exhaustion competed with the desire to continue, days when reality felt too heavy. But even in those moments, Sarah returned to her books, not out of obligation, but out of emotional necessity. They offered order amid chaos, logic amid injustice, meaning amid scarcity. Little by little, that refuge shaped something essential within her, the belief that knowledge did not depend on privilege, but on persistence, that even without resources, it was possible to cultivate something no one could take away. Studying became a safe territory, a place where her inner voice gained strength. And without realizing it, she was building an identity that was not based only on what she lacked, but on what she chose to nurture. While the world insisted on reminding her of her limitations, she responded with learning, silent, constant, determined. This was the moment when studying ceased to be just a refuge and became a promise that did not yet have a clear shape, but carried something powerful, the possibility of a future different from the one imposed on her.
Sarah was still a child when she understood, without anyone needing to explain, that life would not give her the time that other children had. There was no exact moment, no formal conversation, no announced decision. There was only the gradual realization that in that house, every effort mattered. Every coin made a difference. Every bit of help, no matter how small, eased a burden that should not have rested on the shoulders of a single woman. Work entered Sarah's life quietly, almost naturally, not as explicit exploitation, but as a direct consequence of necessity. It started small. A neighbor who needed someone to watch her child for a few hours. One afternoon here, another there. Nothing fixed, nothing guaranteed. Just occasional opportunities that arose because someone trusted her. Caring for children seemed simple to those who watched from the outside, but for Sarah, it was a task that required constant attention, patience, and maturity. She noticed every detail. She knew when a child was restless, when they needed to be held, when the crying meant hunger or exhaustion. There was in her an early sensitivity developed by the very reality she faced at home. While other children played without concern, Sarah learned to watch, to protect, to anticipate problems. She learned to be responsible before she fully understood what that word meant.
There was no room for distraction. A mistake could cost more than a scolding. It could cost trust, and trust was everything she had to continue being called. The change she earned was small, sometimes just a few coins, other times a crumpled bill handed over in haste. It was not enough money to change the situation at home, but it was enough to represent something greater: participation. Sarah was not merely existing in that difficult reality, she was contributing. When she arrived home and handed the money to her mother, there were no emotional speeches, there were no tears, just a simple gesture, a small hand extended, the mother receiving it, a silent look that said more than any words could. For her mother, that money was relief. For Sarah, it was pride. Not pride in a vain sense, but in the deep sense of belonging. She felt that she was part of the struggle, that she was not just someone to be protected, but someone who also protected. This shaped in her a sense of duty that did not come from fear, but from dignity. Working, even at a young age, did not make her feel smaller. On the contrary, it made her feel useful. Over time, the small jobs increased. In addition to caring for children, requests appeared to clean yards, help with simple moves, organize things, run errands. Sarah accepted whatever came up. She did not choose, she did not complain. Each task was a chance to help at home, and at the same time to learn something new. She learned early the value of effort. She learned that money did not come easily, that each bill carried hours of attention, fatigue, and responsibility. While other children saw work as something distant, reserved for adults, Sarah saw it as part of life. She did not romanticize it, she simply accepted it. There were moments when exhaustion appeared, long days, weekends that could have been free but were not. Sometimes she watched other children playing from afar and felt something difficult to define. It was not exactly envy, it was a quiet awareness that her childhood was different, shorter, heavier. Even so, she did not rebel, not because she was resigned, but because she intuitively understood that complaining would not change reality. Instead, she developed a practical posture, firm, internally disciplined. Work did not harden her on the outside, but it strengthened something within. What was most striking was that Sarah never felt forced by her mother. Her mother never demanded that she work, never charged her, never imposed it. That made the decision even more meaningful. Sarah worked because she wanted to help, because she saw her mother's exhaustion, because she felt that sharing the effort made the burden less lonely. This dynamic created between them a silent bond of partnership. They were not just mother and daughter, they were two people facing the same reality, each with the resources they had. The mother with her hard work, Sarah with her early willingness. The sense of duty that was born there was not based on guilt, but on values. Sarah learned that dignity is not tied to the type of work one does, but to the way it is done. She learned to meet schedules, to respect commitments, to deal with different kinds of people. She learned to follow orders without feeling diminished and to perform tasks with care, even when no one was watching. These experiences shaped her relationship with the adult world long before the right time. She began to observe more than she spoke, to understand environments, to perceive hierarchies, to recognize silent injustices, and above all, to develop an emotional resilience that did not express in confrontations, but in constancy. Early work, although harsh, did not completely rob her of her humanity. On the contrary, it refined her empathy. By caring for children, she became even more aware of how childhood should be protected. By working for small change, she understood the value of every modest gain. By helping her mother, she consolidated a deep sense of responsibility. Without knowing it, Sarah was being prepared for much greater challenges. That girl who learned to work early was in truth learning to remain steady in environments that would not be fair. She was learning to endure without breaking, to act correctly even when no one rewarded it. That period of her life brought her no applause, it brought no external recognition, but it built something solid within her, the conviction that her value did not depend on ease and that her dignity could not be taken by circumstances. Early work was not just a difficult phase, it was a silent school, a school that taught Sarah discipline, humility, and above all, character. A character that would later be tested in much harsher ways, but that had already been forged there, in the small jobs, in the carefully counted change, and in the quiet pride of being able to say, even while still so young, I help. Time passed the way it usually does for those who have no choice. Far too fast. Sarah grew up without ceremony, without clear milestones separating childhood, adolescence, and adult life. There were no rites of passage, no parties or symbolic celebrations. There was only continuity, one day after another, responsibilities piling up, silent expectations being internalized. She grew up without losing her humility because she never had the opportunity to develop illusions about herself or about the world. Reality was always present, firm, constant. Even so, something in her changed, not abruptly, but gradually. A maturity that did not come from age, but from experience. Sarah was no longer just the girl who helped her mother. She was a young woman who understood with uncomfortable clarity how the world worked. She knew who had access to opportunities and who had to fight for every inch gained. She knew that effort was not always recognized, and she knew, above all, that no one would suddenly appear to rescue her from that life. This awareness did not make her bitter, it made her lucid. For the first time, Sarah understood that waiting was dangerous, waiting for justice, for recognition, for external help. She had seen people work hard their entire lives and still remain trapped in the same difficulties. She had seen her mother age before her time. She had seen dreams postponed indefinitely until they ceased to exist. It was at that point that something changed inside her. Not a fanciful desire to succeed in life, but a silent decision not to limit herself to what had been imposed on her. Sarah began to think of something bigger, not bigger in the sense of status or immediate wealth, but bigger than simply getting by. She began to observe the adults around her more closely. She noticed those who seemed resigned and those who still carried some inner flame. She perceived how some people settled, not out of laziness, but out of exhaustion, and she decided, with a mix of courage and fear, that she would not allow her life to be reduced to the repetition of that cycle. Humility remained. Sarah did not see herself as special. She did not believe she deserved privileges, but she began to believe that she could try something different, that she could, at least, place herself in environments where there was some chance of growth. This realization was fundamental. She did not wait until she felt ready. She simply decided not to remain still. The idea of seeking a more structured job emerged gradually, not as a carefully crafted plan, but as a strategic necessity. Informal work had taught her a great deal, but it did not offer stability. Sarah knew that if she wanted to help her mother more consistently, and at the same time build something of her own, she would need to enter a space where she could learn more and grow more. That was when the opening at the hotel appeared. It did not come as a grand opportunity announced in bold letters. There were no promises of a career or glamour. It was a simple position: housekeeper, hard work, rigid hours, modest pay. But to Sarah, it represented something important: an organized professional environment with clear rules and the possibility, however remote, of advancement. She learned about the opening through comments, a conversation overheard by chance, someone mentioning that the hotel needed new staff. Nothing was handed to her easily. She had to pursue it, ask questions, expose herself.
face the fear of not being chosen. The application process was for Sarah an internal test. She did not have sophisticated clothes. She did not have influential recommendations. She had only her posture, her willingness, and the invisible baggage of everything she had already lived through. When she presented herself, she did so with politeness, simplicity, and attentiveness. She did not try to appear to be something she was not. There was a quiet seriousness about her that contrasted with her youth, a discreet firmness, an attentive gaze. She did not speak too much, but she listened carefully. She answered honestly. She showed a desire to learn without flattery. When she left the interview, she did not create exaggerated expectations. She was accustomed to uncertainty. She knew she might not be called. Even so, something inside her had shifted. For the first time, she felt that she had taken a concrete step towards something new. The decision to try for that position was not merely professional, it was symbolic. It represented the definitive transition into adult life. Sarah was saying, even without words, that she would not accept living only by reacting to circumstances, that she would begin to act. When the response came confirming her hiring, there was no uncontrolled euphoria. There was relief, there was gratitude, there was a silence heavy with meaning. Sarah understood that the door that had opened was not a reward, but a beginning that would demand a great deal from her. She knew the environment would be difficult. She knew she would face hierarchies, judgments, possibly prejudices, but she also knew something fundamental. She was prepared, not because everything would be easy, but because her history had trained her to endure. The transition into adult life did not come with promises of comfort. It came with expanded responsibility, with expanded expectations, with real risks. But Sarah entered this new phase without losing what defined her: humility, awareness, and quiet determination. She did not expect to be saved. She did not expect immediate recognition. She expected only the chance to work, to learn, and to remain firm. And that, for someone like her, was already an act of courage. This was the moment when Sarah stopped being merely someone who endured life and became someone who, even with fear, chose to move forward.
Sarah's first day at the hotel did not begin when she walked through the revolving door. It began earlier. It began outside, when she stopped for a few seconds on the sidewalk and looked at the building in front of her. The hotel was not just a workplace, it was a symbol. Large, imposing, well-maintained, clean facade, glass reflecting the city, doors that opened automatically. Everything there seemed to belong to a world that had always existed parallel to hers. The impact was immediate, visual, emotional, and silent. Sarah felt her body react before she could even form a thought. Her heart sped up slightly. Her hands became more deliberate, as if they needed to behave better in that environment. It was not pure fear, it was awareness. The clear awareness of entering a space that had not been made for people like her. As she crossed the entrance, the contrast became even more evident. The polished floor reflected the soft light of the space. The smell was different, clean, controlled, impersonal. Well-dressed employees moved about with firm steps. Guests passed by speaking softly, carrying expensive luggage, wearing clothes Sarah recognized only from store windows she had never entered. Everything there seemed too organized, too distant from the everyday disorder she was used to. Every detail had a purpose, every object had value. And in that moment, Sarah felt small, not because anyone had said anything, but because the environment spoke for itself. The social difference was evident in every gesture, in the quick glances, in the way some people completely ignored the presence of the staff. Sarah quickly realized that there was an invisible but extremely clear hierarchy there. Those who served, those who were served, those who were seen, those who were merely functional. She was directed to the housekeeping department. She received the uniform, simple, standardized, neutral. As she put it on, she felt something difficult to explain. It was not shame, it was a mixture of acceptance and alertness. That uniform did not diminish who she was, but it made clear the place she would occupy there. As a housekeeper, her role was to take care of what almost no one wanted to see. Make beds left undone by strangers, clean traces of passing lives, collect used towels, carelessly discarded trash, remnants of an intimacy that did not belong to her. It was invisible work, essential but rarely acknowledged. In the first days, the feeling of inferiority was constant, not because anyone insulted her directly, but because the entire system seemed to remind her at every moment who she was in that context. Orders were given bluntly, the pace was intense, time was measured, there was no room for mistakes. Sarah observed the other employees. Some of the more experienced ones moved naturally, almost automatically. Others carried on their faces signs of fatigue accumulated over the years. There were also silent looks of judgment, unspoken comparisons, small gestures that made it clear she was new, that she had to prove something. Internally, she felt a constant conflict. Part of her wanted to disappear, to blend in, not to draw attention. Another part, deeper, reminded her of everything she had gone through to be there. It reminded her of her mother, of the sacrifices, of the long road to that point, and that kept her standing. Sarah's determination did not manifest in speeches or confrontations. It showed in the care with which she made each bed, in the way she aligned the sheets, in the diligence with which she cleaned surfaces no one would praise. She did her work well, not to be seen, but because she was incapable of doing it any other way. She knew that was not the end of the road, but she also knew she could not treat it as something temporary in a careless sense. Each task was a test, each day a silent opportunity to show consistency, even if no one was watching. There were moments when the emotional weight was heavier than the physical one, when she walked through luxurious corridors pushing heavy carts, when she entered enormous suites and imagined what it would be like to live in a place where the fear of losing one's home did not exist. These comparisons came, but she learned to control them. She did not allow them to turn into resentment. The initial feeling of inferiority did not paralyze her. On the contrary, it worked as a constant reminder that she needed to be better than the minimum expected, not out of submission, but out of strategy. Sarah understood, even without clearly articulating it, that in environments like that, mistakes are not equally forgiven, and that people like her rarely receive a second chance. She began arriving before her shift, leaving after, learning procedures with absolute attention. She observed how the most efficient housekeepers organized their time, how they avoided rework, how they dealt with unforeseen situations. Sarah absorbed everything. There was no naivety in her posture. There was discipline. She did not romanticize hard work. She simply executed it with precision. Each room delivered correctly was a small, invisible victory, an internal confirmation that she was capable of occupying that space, even if life had not invited her into it. The hotel, with all its grandeur, represented a new world, a world with its own rules, rigid expectations, and little empathy for those who failed. Sarah understood this early, and instead of being intimidated, she decided to adapt without losing herself. She did not yet know that this environment would put her character to the test in profound ways. She did not know about the injustices she would face, the humiliations that would come. But in that moment, as she pushed the cart through the silent corridors, she carried with her something no one there could see, an entire history of resistance, and that made all the difference. Entering the hotel was not just a new job, it was the definitive crossing between two worlds, and Sarah, even feeling the weight of that transition, chose to remain silent, attentive, determined.
As the weeks passed, something became evident to those who observed closely, although few truly did.
Sarah learned quickly, very quickly, not only the technical procedures of the job, but the invisible logic that sustained how that place functioned. She understood the rhythm, the patterns, the unspoken expectations. She learned where she could afford fewer mistakes, where she needed to be impeccable. Sarah's competence did not come from formal training or previous experience in similar environments. It came from something deeper, the discipline built over the course of her life. From an early age, she had learned that mistakes were costly, and that getting things right was often nothing more than the minimum required to keep going. While other housekeepers carried out their tasks mechanically, Sarah did something extra, not out of explicit ambition, but by nature. Care was present in every gesture. She did not merely make beds, she aligned fabrics with precision. She did not merely clean surfaces, she checked to see whether anything had been forgotten. She did not merely follow the task list, she anticipated needs. She paid attention to details that almost no one valued: the exact position of the pillows, the absence of marks on the mirror, the care taken when folding towels, small corrections made before they turned into complaints, details that did not appear in reports but that made a difference in the guest's experience. This attention was accompanied by a quiet demeanor. Sarah did not boast, she did not comment on her actions, she did not try to stand out verbally. She preferred to let the work speak for her, even knowing that, in many cases, it spoke too softly to be heard. Gradually, a reputation began to form, not a reputation announced, but whispered. Some colleagues noticed that when Sarah handled a room, there was rarely any rework. Supervisors noticed fewer complaints associated with the areas under her responsibility. Her name appeared occasionally in brief conversations, almost without emphasis. It was a slow construction, invisible to most, but real. The contrast between Sarah's effort and the recognition she received was striking. While some less careful employees received occasional praise for small, visible actions, Sarah accumulated silent successes that went unnoticed. There were no pats on the back, there was no public recognition, there was only the continuation of the work. This imbalance could have generated deep frustration, and at times it did. Sarah did feel the weight of not being seen, especially when she witnessed others' mistakes being ignored or minimized, while she demanded of herself that she not fail even once. But even in those moments, something prevented her from giving up. She had learned early that not all value is immediately recognized, and that character is not measured by external response, but by internal coherence. Sarah did her work well because it reflected who she was, not because she expected immediate reward. Even so, the environment was beginning to reveal tensions. Some colleagues viewed Sarah's dedication with suspicion, others with discomfort. There were those who interpreted her diligence as an attempt to outshine others, even though she had never demonstrated such an objective. In competitive environments, silence can be interpreted as a threat. Sarah felt those looks. She noticed subtle changes in behavior, cutting remarks, small exclusions, nothing explicit, but enough to create a climate of constant vigilance. Still, she did not change her posture. She did not react. She did not explain herself. She kept working. Sarah's competence also manifested in how she dealt with mistakes, her own and those of others. When she made an error, she corrected it quickly, without excessive justification. When she saw failures by others, she simply adjusted whatever was possible within her reach. This posture reinforced her reliability, even if it did not generate widespread sympathy. She understood, even without fully rationalizing it, that hierarchical environments do not always reward the most dedicated. Often they reward the most visible, the most articulate, or the most politically aligned. Sarah did not master this game, and perhaps did not even want to. The contrast between effort and recognition became a daily test, a test of patience, of identity. Every day she had to decide whether she would continue being who she was or adapt to a model that did not belong to her. And every day she chose the first option, not because it was easy, but because abandoning her values would have been a greater defeat than any lack of recognition. Sarah's silent competence was beginning to put down roots, invisible but deep. And although she did not know it yet, those roots would be essential when the environment became truly hostile. For now, she kept working, learning, observing, maintaining dignity in a place that rarely valued it. And even without applause, she was building something solid, something that could not be easily destroyed. This period did not bring glory, it brought consistency, and for someone like Sarah, that was more important.
The hostility did not arrive abruptly. There was no specific day on which Sarah could say, from here on, everything changed. It settled in gradually, like an atmosphere that grows heavier without anyone opening a window. At first, they were just sensations, looks that lingered too long, silences that lasted longer than necessary, small shifts in the tone of conversations when she approached. Sarah noticed before she understood. It had always been that way. Since childhood, she had learned to grasp what was not said, and in that environment, something was changing. Her colleagues began to notice not only her dedication, but also something Sarah had never used as a tool, her appearance. She did not dress provocatively. The uniform was the same as everyone else's. Her hair was tied back simply. Her face was almost always serious, focused. Even so, there was in her a discreet, natural beauty that did not ask for attention, but attracted it. The combination of beauty and competence was unsettling, not because it was flaunted, but because it was silent. Sarah did not compete openly. She did not fight for space. She simply existed, and that was enough to provoke comparisons. In environments where personal value is fragile, any contrast becomes a threat. The comments began indirectly, phrases thrown into the air with no explicit recipient, insinuations about wanting to show off, jokes disguised as humor, remarks about how some people try too hard. Nothing that could be formally reported, but everything carefully calculated to wound. Sarah listened, absorbed, did not react, not out of weakness, but out of experience. She had already learned that confrontation does not always bring justice. Often, it only exposes those who are already in a vulnerable position. So she kept working, as she always had. Envy grew because it found no visible resistance, and that, paradoxically, fed it. Some colleagues began to act with deliberate coldness, to exclude Sarah from conversations, to fail to inform her about routine changes, to leave the heaviest tasks for her whenever possible. Small acts that combined created a hostile environment. Management, in turn, maintained a distant posture, cold, partial. There were no direct aggressions from above, but there was omission. And omission, in many cases, weighs as much as action. Supervisors preferred not to get involved. They ignored evident tensions. They treated veiled complaints as personal issues. Sarah quickly realized that she could not count on neutrality. Management tended to protect those who already had space, those who spoke louder, those who moved more skillfully within that invisible game of alliances. Sarah was not part of that. She did not know how to be part of it, and perhaps did not even want to be. In addition to her colleagues and management, there was yet another element that deepened the discomfort. Some wealthy employees and regular guests, people who moved through the hotel with the confidence of those who feel they own the place, even when they do not. To them, Sarah was part of the scenery, a function, a body that performed tasks.
Some looks were too explicit, appraising. Others were laden with contempt. Comments about knowing your place. Orders given harshly, unnecessarily. Small humiliations disguised as authority. Nothing physical, nothing that could easily be proven, but enough to repeatedly remind her of the position she occupied there. Sarah felt the impact of these moments not only in the present, but in the past. Each humiliation at the hotel echoed something old, the same sense of not belonging from childhood, the same silent exclusions, the same unjust logic. No matter how hard you try, there will always be someone willing to remind you that you came from below. That pattern was not new. What changed was the setting. Before, they were children. Now they were adults. People theoretically mature, but driven by the same small impulses. The difference was that now the consequences were greater. A mistake cost a job. Confrontation cost stability. Internally, Sarah faced a deep conflict. Part of her wanted to disappear again, to make herself invisible, to simply do the work and leave. Another part, more conscious, refused to accept that this would be her definitive fate. She did not want to defeat anyone. She did not want to humiliate in return. She only wanted to exist with dignity. The constant hostility demanded emotional energy. There were days when Sarah arrived home exhausted not by physical effort, but by the weight of maintaining her integrity in an environment that tried to erode it. She wondered in silence whether she was wrong, whether she should change, whether she should be less competent, less attentive, less herself. But something within her resisted. A conviction formed over years of injustice. Yielding at that point would mean losing herself, and that she could not allow. The reinforcement of the pattern she had lived in childhood was painful, but also clarifying. Sarah began to understand that injustice was not an isolated event from the past. It was a recurring phenomenon, a reflection of social, emotional, and human structures that repeat themselves in different stages of life. This understanding did not make her bitter, it made her firm. She stopped waiting for validation from that environment. She began to focus only on what she could control: her behavior, her ethics, her posture. She knew she could not avoid envy. She could not please everyone, but she could choose not to become what had hurt her. The hostility did not break Sarah, but it prepared her. Each malicious comment, each side glance, each veiled humiliation strengthened something silent within her, a clarity, an emotional maturity that did not need applause. She did not know it yet, but she was approaching a decisive point, a moment when all of this would be tested in a public and brutal way. For now, she simply continued, working, observing, enduring, and as always, in silence.
Joseph was not a man with a loud presence. He did not walk through the corridors imposing authority with his voice, nor did he insist on being recognized at every step. His presence was felt in another way, through the silence that formed when he appeared, through the automatic posture of those who straightened their backs, through the subtle change in the rhythm of the environment. He did not need to announce who he was. The place already knew. Joseph had built that hotel over decades. He had not inherited a fortune. He had not been a young prodigy. His path had been marked by hard decisions, calculated losses, and a deep understanding of how people truly function when no one is watching. Perhaps that was why he spoke little. He learned early on that too many words confuse, while silence reveals. He did not involve himself in day-to-day operational routines. He trusted the hierarchy he had created: managers, supervisors, department heads.
He did not interfere in minor conflicts, nor did he personally correct small mistakes. To many, this was a sign of distance, to others of coldness. But in truth, Joseph was observing, always observing. His attention was not focused on coldly filled reports, nor solely on the numbers that closed the month. He observed behaviors, patterns, consistency. He knew that companies do not collapse only because of financial loss. They collapse when internal character deteriorates, and that does not appear on spreadsheets. Joseph had a habit of circulating through the hotel at unusual hours, sometimes very early, other times late at night, without warning, without escort. He walked through corridors, the lobby, and areas few executives frequented. He watched how employees reacted when they believed no one important was watching. That was how, little by little, Sarah entered his field of vision. There was no striking first moment, no dramatic scene, just repetition, consistency. Joseph began to notice that certain rooms rarely generated complaints when they were under the responsibility of the same housekeeper, that some departments functioned better on certain shifts, that there was someone there who seemed to take the work with rare seriousness. He did not know her name right away, nor her story. He simply noticed her posture, her rhythm, her attention to detail. While other employees moved hurriedly or distractedly, that young woman seemed present, whole, as if she understood that even in invisible tasks, there was responsibility. Joseph valued that more than any speech. He knew how to recognize those who worked well only when observed, and those who worked well even in anonymity. That distinction, for him, said everything. Over time, he also began to observe the reactions around Sarah, the strange atmosphere, the coldness of some colleagues, the absence of praise proportional to the evident effort. Joseph did not draw hasty conclusions. He simply recorded. He knew that environments like that do not arise out of nowhere. They are built slowly, through the accumulation of small permissions. He also perceived something more subtle. Sarah did not react. She did not confront. She did not justify herself. She did not seek visibility. She continued working with the same posture, regardless of the environment. This awakened a quiet curiosity in him. It was not submission, it was control. Joseph had a personal rule: observe more than intervene. He believed that true character is revealed under prolonged pressure, not in isolated moments, and Sarah was under constant pressure. As the days passed, a narrative expectation began to form, if only in his mind. Joseph sensed that there was something there worthy of attention. He did not know yet what. He only knew that that young woman carried something that could not be learned in internal training sessions. He was not a sentimental man. He was not easily moved, but he deeply respected consistency. For Joseph, talent could be trained, technique could be corrected, but character was rare. Even so, he did nothing. He did not call Sarah, he did not praise her, he did not interfere. He continued observing, because he knew that environments like that produce tests, extreme situations, moments when the truth comes to the surface. Joseph was waiting for that moment. Not out of morbid curiosity, but because he believed that important decisions should not be made based on initial impressions. They need to be grounded in facts. And facts, he knew, emerge when someone is put to the test. Meanwhile, Sarah continued her routine, unaware that she was being observed by someone who saw beyond the position, beyond the hierarchy, beyond appearances. She was not working to impress Joseph. She didn't even know he noticed her, and that, to him, made everything even more revealing. Joseph understood something that few leaders understand. The most valuable people rarely ask for space. They simply endure long enough, for someone with attentive eyes to see them. And in that hotel, amid envy, hostility, and silence, he saw Sarah, not as an ordinary housekeeper, but as someone who had not yet been broken.
The trap did not arise by chance. It was built with patience, resentment, and calculation. Like almost anything that is truly dangerous, it began subtly, diluted in gestures that seemed harmless. There was no explicit conspiracy, no secret meeting in raised voices, only small decisions spread among people who had already decided internally that Sarah needed to be contained. Envy, when it matures, rarely seeks direct confrontation. It prefers another person's mistake. It prefers that the victim fall on her own, or at least that it appear she fell on her own. It all began with fragmented information, last-minute changes to the routine, instructions given verbally, never in writing, orders coming from different people at different times, always accompanied by vague phrases such as "management asked for it," or "this is how we do it when the guest is special." Sarah sensed that something was different, but she did not have enough elements to question it. And questioning in that environment always carried risk. She had already learned that asking too many questions could be interpreted as insubordination. So she listened, absorbed, and moved on. The manipulation was precisely because it exploited Sarah's main virtue, her trust in work done properly. She believed that if she followed the instructions she received, she would be protected. She did not imagine that those instructions had been designed to lead her into error. The colleagues involved in the trap knew the hotel's dynamics well. They knew which procedures were most rigid when it came to important guests. They knew which failures were unforgivable. And, above all, they knew that Sarah would not improvise. She would follow exactly what she was told. They altered schedules, omitted details, transferred responsibilities ambiguously. They created a gray zone in which error was not a possibility, it was an inevitable consequence. The important guest arrived on an apparently ordinary day, a high-profile man known for extreme demands and for his close relationship with management. His arrival mobilized the entire hotel. Tensed supervisors, alert management, everything had to be impeccable. Sarah was assigned to prepare the room. It was not the first time she had taken care of special suites, but that time, something seemed out of place. Small inconsistencies in the instructions, a request that went against the usual standard, an adjustment made exceptionally. She hesitated for a moment, thought about confirming, thought about asking, but she remembered previous experiences, the cold responses, the impatient look from management. She decided to trust. She carried out each task with her usual care, checked what was within her reach, followed exactly what she had been instructed to do. She handed over the room believing she had done everything correctly. When the error was revealed, it was devastating. Not a small detail, not something easily corrected, but a serious failure, directly related to the comfort and demands of the guest. Something that could not be attributed to chance, something that to outside eyes sounded like negligence. The reaction was immediate. The guest complained loudly. Management was called. Supervisors rushed in. The atmosphere hardened. Sarah's name was mentioned, not as a suspect, but as the responsible. She was summoned in haste, interrupted in the middle of her work, taken to the site of the error in front of other people. Employees stopped to watch, silence mixed with curious looks, some far too satisfied. The humiliation was public. Sarah tried to explain, not in desperation, but with firmness. She reported the instructions she had received, said what she had been told to do, but the words seemed to fall into a prepared void. The people who had given the instructions
now remained silent. Some pretended not to remember. Others avoided eye contact. The narrative was ready, simple, convenient. A new employee in a low-level position had committed a serious error with an important guest. There was no need for a long investigation. The decision needed to be quick, exemplary. The tension escalated rapidly. Management adopted a rigid posture. The tone was accusatory, not investigatory. Sarah felt something familiar settle in her chest, that old sensation of inevitable injustice, the same one she had known in childhood when she was excluded without the right to defend herself. She remained silent for a second or two, not because she had nothing to say, but because she understood in that moment that the truth was not what was being sought. What was being sought was a culprit. When she spoke again, it was calmly. She said that she had followed the instructions, that she had never acted negligently, that her record demonstrated this. She did not raise her voice. She did not beg. She did not accuse anyone. This was the most difficult moment, because Sarah knew exactly what had happened. She knew who had planned it. She knew that she could defend herself by naming names. She could point fingers. She could expose the manipulation. But she also knew the cost of doing so. She knew how environments like that work. She knew that even by telling the truth, she could leave marked as problematic, confrontational, someone who creates problems. The trap was complete, because it placed Sarah before an impossible moral choice: save herself by denouncing others, or maintain her integrity and accept the consequence. Management did not take long. The decision came quickly, harsh, irrevocable. Sarah was fired. In front of colleagues, in front of supervisors, in front of the complicit silence of those who knew and did not speak. Her body remained firm, but inside something broke. Not in visible pieces, but in deep, silent fractures. She left the hotel that day carrying more than a dismissal. She carried the confirmation of a cruel pattern. Doing everything right does not guarantee justice. Trust does not always protect. Silence sometimes demands a price that is far too high. The trap had fulfilled its role. But what no one there knew, except perhaps one person, was that this story was not yet over.
The way back home is not long in distance, but it is heavy in weight. Each step Sarah takes seems to cross not only familiar straits, but entire layers of her own history. Her body moves on autopilot. Her mind, however, revisits everything at once: the hotel, the looks, the final sentence, the silent exit. Nothing organizes itself. Everything overlaps. She grips her bag tightly, as if it were the last remaining anchor. The world around her keeps functioning with an almost offensive normalcy. People talk, cars pass, shops remain open. For Sarah, however, something essential has been interrupted. There is no sense of a grand ending, only an internal collapse, discreet and continuous. The crying does not come immediately. It accumulates. It gets trapped in her chest, compressing her breathing. She learned very early on that crying in public changes nothing. It only exposes you further. So she swallows it, takes a deep breath, adjusts her face, maintains a neutral expression. It is a conscious effort, almost technical. When she finally gets home, she closes the door with excessive care. She does not want to make noise. She does not want to announce her presence. The silence of the place weighs on her. It is a familiar silence, but now it carries something different. Before, it was the silence of exhaustion. Now, it is the silence of perceived defeat. She sets the bag down in a corner, takes off her shoes slowly, and sits. Only then does her body allow the tension to escape. The crying comes,
but it does not explode. It flows, silent, contained. A kind of crying that does not ask for comfort, only for space to exist. The tears are not only for the lost job, they are for everything that it represents. The sense of injustice is deep and hard to name. It is not loud rebellion, it is something more corrosive. The clear awareness that she did everything right and was still punished, that she followed invisible rules that no one else seemed to respect, that she believed, once again, that effort and dignity would be enough. She asks herself, in silence, where exactly she went wrong. She replays every gesture, every decision, every extreme care. She finds no real flaws, only the trap, and that hurts more than admitting a personal mistake. Because if there was no mistake, then there is no control, and that idea is frightening. The thought of her mother rises immediately in her chest like a weight, not as accusation, but as fear. Fear of disappointing her, fear of having failed in the one mission she always took seriously, not becoming another burden. The image of her tired, resilient mother, sacrificing herself in silence, returns with force. Sarah feels that she has lost something that was not only hers. She imagines the moment of telling her, the simple sentence she will have to say, the look she will try to interpret. She does not fear judgment, she fears sadness. She fears seeing in her mother's eyes the confirmation that the world remains a place too harsh for those who try to do the right thing. The doubt settles in more deeply. Is it worth it? Is it worth being correct? Is it worth enduring in silence? Is it worth making the effort when the result can be the same for those who do not care? These questions do not arise as a philosophical challenge. They arise as exhaustion, as someone who does not want to give up, but is tired of resisting without return. Dignity, which had always been her foundation, begins to be questioned, not of weakness, but of where. She feels small again, not childlike, vulnerable, as if the careful construction of her identity had cracked at a sensitive point. The adult Sarah, responsible, competent, gives way for a few moments to the girl who learned too early that the world does not apologize. Even so, even at the peak of this emotional fall, something remains intact. It is not clear hope, it is not explicit strength, it is simply a silent core that refuses to accept that this is the end. Sarah does not make plans, she does not make promises, she only feels, with painful clarity, that something needs to change, even if she does not yet know what. Act 15 is not about overcoming. It is about exhaustion. It is the point where the accumulated weight finally finds space to manifest. It is the moment when the pain is no longer ignorable. Sarah is hurt, confused, tired, but she is conscious, and that consciousness, still fragile, will be decisive for everything that comes next.
The information does not reach Joseph in a dramatic way. There is no rush, no raised voices, no urgent reports landing on his desk. It arrives as almost everything that truly matters does, discreetly, almost mundanely. A brief comment at the end of a meeting, a name mentioned in passing, a dismissal treated as standard procedure. Joseph listens in silence. He is used to hearing incomplete stories. Years at the head of that hotel taught him that official versions are rarely true versions. They are merely the most convenient ones. Still, he does not react immediately. He shows no visible interest. He simply registers it. Sarah. The name is not unfamiliar to him, not because of closeness, but because consistency always draws the attention of those who truly observe. Joseph is not a man of impulsive interventions. He believes that people's character reveals itself more through time than through isolated events. And over time, Sarah was never noise. She was always presence. He remembers her posture in the corridors, her attentive gaze, the almost excessive care with which she pushed the cleaning cart, the way she rarely spoke but always listened. Employees pass through the hotel every day. Most are invisible. Some go out of their way to be noticed. Sarah never tried to be either, and perhaps that is why she was noticed. The version presented is simple. Serious error, important guest, operational failure, necessary dismissal. Everything very clean, very aligned. Exactly the kind of narrative meant to shut down any questioning, but it does not. Joseph feels something he learned to respect over the course of his life: silent incoherence. It is not a clear accusation nor concrete proof. It is simply the sense that something does not fit. He trusted reports too much in the past, and he paid for it. He asks for more details. Not in an accusatory way, he simply asks, who gave the instructions? Who supervised? What was the employee's track record? The answers come quickly, rehearsed. There is a subtle hurry to close the matter, as if reopening it would be inconvenient. That alone triggers another warning. Joseph notices the tone, the body language, the discomfort that surfaces when someone has to sustain a fragile version. He does not confront, he only listens. The more someone talks to justify themselves, the less he believes. After he is alone, he opens the internal records, performance evaluations, attendance, previous complaints. Sarah's name appears repeatedly associated with terms like efficient, discreet, reliable. No formal warnings, no history of serious error, nothing that would justify immediate dismissal without deeper investigation. He closes the file slowly. The decision begins to take shape, not as an emotional impulse, but as duty. Not out of pity, not out of sympathy, out of coherence. Joseph believes that unjust environments rot from the inside before they fail outwardly, and he did not build that hotel to be upheld by comfortable lies. Even so, he does not act immediately. He observes a bit more. He recalls scenes. He remembers the day he saw Sarah being reprimanded over something minor, while others, clearly negligent, were ignored. At the time, he did not intervene. Now it returns as a late piece of a larger puzzle. He understands the pattern, and patterns are more dangerous than isolated mistakes. Joseph does not need absolute proof to know that something was handled incorrectly. He needs only one thing: to hear the other side, something that until now no one has bothered to do. He calls his assistant. The order is simple, direct, without unnecessary explanations. Locate Sarah, ask her to come here, tell her it is important. There is no promise, there is no savior's tone, only the intention to listen. When the assistant leaves, Joseph remains seated, looking out the office window. The city goes on outside, alive and indifferent to small individual dramas. He knows that, but he also knows that it is these silent stories that define the integrity of a place. For Sarah, this call does not yet exist. She is still immersed in her own emotional collapse, still believing that everything ended without witnesses. But while she tries to reorganize her dignity in silence, someone, for the first time, begins to officially question what happened. Act 16 is not redemption. It is investigation. It is the slow rupture of the comfortable version. It is the moment when silence finally finds someone willing to listen to it, and that alone shifts the axis of the story.
Sarah enters the hotel as someone stepping onto territory that no longer belongs to her. The corridors are the same, yet they are not. There is something different in the air, not in the environment, but within her. Each step carries a weight that was not there before. It is not fear, nor is it hope. It is a weary lucidity,
belonging to someone who has already understood that some truths do not change the outcome, yet still need to be spoken. She is led to the administrative floor. She has never been there before. She has always worked behind the scenes, in spaces where decisions were not made, only executed. Now she walks through doors that, until recently, seemed reserved for another kind of person. Her heart beats steadily, but restrained. Sarah did not rehearse a speech. She did not plan impactful phrases. She did not build a strategic defense. All she has is her own memory and the clear conscience of someone who knows exactly what she did and what she did not do. When she enters the room, Joseph is already seated. He rises only enough to acknowledge her presence. There is no excessive formality, no calculated coldness, only respect. A simple gesture, but one that Sarah notices immediately, not because she is used to it, but precisely because she is not. She sits when invited. For a few seconds, no one speaks. Joseph observes, not as a manager, not as an owner. He observes as someone trying to understand who stands before him before hearing any version of events. He notices her upright posture, even after the dismissal. He notices her steady hands despite the evident emotional exhaustion. He notices a gaze that does not look away, but also does not challenge. Then he speaks. He does not ask about the mistake. He does not accuse. He does not pressure. He asks Sarah to tell, in her own words, what happened. And Sarah begins. She speaks calmly, without haste, without resentment. Her voice carries no bitterness, but it also carries no submission. She describes the facts as they occurred, the instructions she received, the trust that was placed in her, the moment she realized something was wrong, too late to correct it. She explains every detail with precision, like someone who has always needed to be exact to avoid being misunderstood. Joseph listens in silence. Sarah does not dramatize. She does not try to portray herself as a victim. She does not omit her own participation. She assumes responsibility for what was entrusted to her, but she also does not accept blame that is not hers. There is a rare balance in her speech, humility without self-erasure. At a certain moment, Joseph pauses. He asks a simple, direct question, the question Sarah knew would come from the instant she was summoned. Did someone guide you in this way, knowing it could go wrong? Time seems to slow. This is the breaking point, the exact instant in which the story could take another path. Sarah understands perfectly what is being offered to her. She could speak, she could name names, she could transfer the weight she carried alone onto those who had engineered it. And for a few seconds, the silence inside her is deafening. She remembers. She remembers her childhood, the silent humiliations, the abandonment without explanations, the times she wanted to scream and was not heard. She remembers how she learned far too early that surviving is not the same as winning, and that winning at the cost of becoming someone you despise is no victory at all. She takes a deep breath. When she answers, her voice does not tremble. She says she followed instructions. She says she trusted. She says she made a mistake by trusting, and she owns that. But she does not accuse. She does not give up names. She does not protect herself by sacrificing others. She does not use injustice as permission to lose her own integrity. She makes it clear, with politeness and serenity, that she would rather bear the consequences than win through the destruction of someone else, even of someone who did not show her the same consideration. Joseph watches her with heightened attention. He does not see naivete in that choice. He sees something rarer, awareness. Sarah is not trying to appear morally superior. She simply does not know how to be any other way. Her ethics are not strategic, they are structural. They were built over years in which preserving dignity was the only thing no one could take from her.
When she finishes speaking, the room remains silent again. But now it is a different silence. It is not awkward. It is respectful. Joseph understands in that moment that he is facing someone who could have left that situation a winner, but chose to leave whole. And that says more about character than any resume or recommendation. He does not respond immediately. He closes the folder in front of him. He folds his hands. He looks directly at Sarah, and for the first time, no longer observes her merely as an employee, but as a person. The meeting does not end there, but something has already ended inside that room. The comfortable version of the facts has lost its strength. The simplified narrative has collapsed. And without raising her voice, without accusing anyone, without asking for anything in return, Sarah has just demonstrated the one thing that can never be taught, only lived. Character is not what is proven when everything is in your favor. It is what is preserved when it would be easier to destroy it.
Sarah enters the hotel as someone stepping onto territory that no longer belongs to her. The corridors are the same, yet they are not. There is something different in the air, not in the environment, but within her. Each step carries a weight that was not there before. It is not fear, nor is it hope. It is a weary lucidity, belonging to someone who has already understood that some truths do not change the outcome, yet still need to be spoken. She is led to the administrative floor. She has never been there before. She has always worked behind the scenes, in spaces where decisions were not made, only executed. Now she walks through doors that, until recently, seemed reserved for another kind of person. Her heart beats steadily, but restrained. Sarah did not rehearse a speech. She did not plan impactful phrases. She did not build a strategic defense. All she has is her own memory and the clear conscience of someone who knows exactly what she did and what she did not do. When she enters the room, Joseph is already seated. He rises only enough to acknowledge her presence. There is no excessive formality, no calculated coldness, only respect. A simple gesture, but one that Sarah notices immediately, not because she is used to it, but precisely because she is not. She sits when invited. For a few seconds, no one speaks. Joseph observes, not as a manager, not as an owner. He observes as someone trying to understand who stands before him before hearing any version of events. He notices her upright posture, even after the dismissal. He notices her steady hands, despite the evident emotional exhaustion. He notices a gaze that does not look away, but also does not challenge. Then he speaks. He does not ask about the mistake. He does not accuse. He does not pressure. He asks Sarah to tell, in her own words, what happened. And Sarah begins. She speaks calmly, without haste, without resentment. Her voice carries no bitterness, but it also carries no submission. She describes the facts as they occurred, the instructions she received, the trust that was placed in her, the moment she realized something was wrong, too late to correct it. She explains every detail with precision, like someone who has always needed to be exact to avoid being misunderstood. Joseph listens in silence. Sarah does not dramatize. She does not try to portray herself as a victim. She does not omit her own participation. She assumes responsibility for what was entrusted to her, but she also does not accept blame that is not hers. There is a rare balance in her speech, humility without self-erasure. At a certain moment, Joseph pauses. He asks a simple, direct question, the question Sarah knew would come from the instant she was summoned. Did someone guide you in this way, knowing it could go wrong? Time seems to slow. This is the breaking point, the exact instant in which the story could take another path. Sarah understands perfectly what is being offered to her. She could speak. She could name names. She could transfer the weight she carried alone onto those who had engineered it. And for a few seconds, the silence inside her is deafening. She remembers. She remembers her childhood, the silent humiliations, the abandonment without explanations. the times she wanted to scream and was not heard. She remembers how she learned far too early that surviving is not the same as winning, and that winning at the cost of becoming someone you despise is no victory at all. She takes a deep breath. When she answers, her voice does not tremble. She says she followed instructions. She says she trusted. She says she made a mistake by trusting, and she owns that. But she does not accuse. She does not give up names. She does not protect herself by sacrificing others. She does not use injustice as permission to lose her own integrity. She makes it clear with politeness and serenity that she would rather bear the consequences than win through the destruction of someone else, even if someone who did not show her the same consideration. Joseph watches her with heightened attention. He does not see naivete in that choice. He sees something rarer, awareness. Sarah is not trying to appear morally superior. She simply doesn't know how to be any other way. Her ethics are not strategic, they are structural. They were built over years in which preserving dignity was the only thing no one could take from her. When she finishes speaking, the room remains silent again. But now it is a different silence. It is not awkward, it is respectful. Joseph understands in that moment that he is facing someone who could have left that situation a winner, but chose to leave whole. And that says more about character than any resume or recommendation. He does not respond immediately. He calmly closes the folder in front of him. He folds his hands. He looks directly at Sarah and for the first time, no longer observes her merely as an employee, but as a person. The meeting does not end there, but something has already ended inside that room. The comfortable version of the facts has lost its strength. The simplified narrative has collapsed. And without raising her voice, without accusing anyone, without asking for anything in return, Sarah has just demonstrated the one thing that can never be taught, only lived. Character is not what is proven when everything is in your favor. It is what is preserved when it is easier to destroy it.
The summons comes without explanations. The order is simple. All employees from housekeeping, supervision, and management must report to the main meeting room. The time is unusual. The tone is neutral. But in environments like that, excessive neutrality always signals something bigger. The murmuring begins even before everyone arrives. There are restless glances, restrained whispers, attempts to guess the reason for the sudden meeting. Some employees walk with apparent calm, but their gestures betray tension. Others already carry a preemptive defense on their faces, as if knowing that the ground could shift at any moment. Management enters confidently, still maintaining the official narrative. For them, the case was closed, an employee dismissed, a mistake resolved, a satisfied guest, the system functioning as it always has. But Joseph enters shortly after, and the room changes. There is no theatrics in his presence. He does not need to raise his voice, nor impose authority through gestures. The silence that settles is automatic. It is the silence that arises when someone recognizes they are not facing a position, but a decision. Joseph positions himself at the front of the room. He does not sit. He does not open reports. He does not immediately look at anyone in particular. He observes the whole, the environment, the people, as if for the first time seeing the hotel from the inside, not as a business, but as a human organism. Then he speaks. His voice is firm, controlled, without anger, and precisely because of that, impossible to ignore. He begins by saying that this meeting is not about an isolated operational mistake. It is not about procedures, nor internal rules. He makes it clear that what will be addressed concerns something deeper, something that does not appear in reports, but that defines the future of any institution, character. Some people shift in their chairs. Joseph speaks about environments where silence becomes the rule, where small injustices accumulate until they seem normal, where mistakes are tolerated in some and unforgivable in others. He does not accuse directly, not yet. He builds the reasoning as someone who leads everyone to an inevitable conclusion. Then he pauses and calls Sarah by name. The impact is immediate. Sarah, who was sitting quietly at the back, does not react immediately. For a second, it seems the air is missing, not because she is unprepared, but because she has never been called to the center of anything, much less in front of everyone, much less after everything that happened. She stands up. Each step toward the front of the room seems to cross not only physical space, but years of silencing. Eyes turn toward her. Some carry surprise, others discomfort, still others something harder to name, guilt. Joseph asks her to stay there, by his side, not as a defendant, not as the accused, but as a reference. He recalls aloud the essential facts, the dismissal, the justification presented, the absence of investigation, the speed with which a story was accepted without question. Then he presents what came to light afterward, the witness, the inconsistencies, the deliberate construction of the mistake. At that moment, he turns to management. No shouting, no explicit humiliation, but there is something harsher, responsibility. Joseph speaks about leadership, about the danger of confusing authority with convenience, about how managers who choose the easier path, protecting structures instead of people, end up creating toxic environments without realizing it. He states clearly that the injustice committed against Sarah was not an accident. It was the consequence of choices. The room is completely silent now. Then he says something no one expected, that Sarah had in front of him the opportunity to defend herself by accusing, that she had the chance to shift the blame, that she could have walked away clean in the eyes of the system, but she did not. Joseph looks directly at everyone. He explains that in that private moment, without an audience, without external pressure, Sarah chose to preserve her own integrity rather than seek revenge, that she spoke clearly, politely, and calmly, that she did not try to destroy anyone, even after being publicly destroyed. The tension changes form. Now it is no longer about the mistake, it is about contrast. Joseph states firmly that character is not revealed when everything is in your favor, but when injustice offers an easy way out, and that in that hotel, few people had such a clear test as Sarah, and few would have passed it in the same way. Then he does something symbolic. He says that decisions will be made, some immediate, others structural. But before any punishment or change, he needed to do something that should never have been necessary. He apologizes, not only personally, but as a leader, apologizes for not seeing sooner, for allowing silence to be mistaken for weakness, for letting someone's dignity be used as a playground for power games. Sarah listens in silence. She does not show emotion visibly, not because she doesn't feel, but because she has spent her entire life learning to sustain emotions without letting them overflow in hostile environments. Still, something within her reorganizes. It is not euphoria, it is delayed validation, and that weighs. Joseph concludes by saying that this moment is not about publicly exposing the guilty, but about redefining boundaries, that environments where character is punished and envy rewarded do not survive in the long term, and that he will not allow that hotel to continue functioning that way. Before ending, he looks at Sarah again and says clearly, audibly for all, "People like you sustain places like this, even when no one notices." There is no applause, no celebration. There is something rarer, respectful silence. Act 19 does not end with explicit victory. It ends with a shift of power. The logic that always governed that space has been exposed,
and in front of everyone, it has lost legitimacy. Sarah did not defeat anyone. She defeated a narrative. And in that moment, everyone there understood that something irreversible had happened.
The silence that lingers after Joseph's final words is not broken immediately. There is no movement, no whispers, no rehearsed reactions. It is a heavy, dense silence, the kind that arises when an entire structure realizes that something fundamental has just been displaced. It is not merely embarrassment, it is recalibration. People are consciously or unconsciously trying to understand where they now exist from that moment onward. Joseph does not hurry. He knows that truly transformative decisions do not need to be announced in haste. They need to be understood, even if only later. He walks slowly to the end of the conference table, places his hands on the dark wood surface, and surveys the group again. His gaze scans each face. Some avoid eye contact, others maintain it, but rigidly. Some still try to appear normal, as if all of this were just another difficult meeting. Then he speaks again. He says that justice does not end with verbal acknowledgement. Words, no matter how correct, do not repair distorted structures, and that environments only truly change when concrete decisions are made, decisions that come at a cost. Joseph states that after hearing Sarah, after hearing the witness, after reviewing the history and observing patterns of behavior within the hotel, he has reached a clear conclusion. The problem was never just a mistake. It was the logic that determined who could err and who could not. He pauses. This pause is not dramatic, it is strategic, because what comes next is not only unexpected, it is disruptive. Joseph says that he has decided to create a position that did not exist until now, a position of direct trust, without management intermediaries, without political filters, without the need to please corrupted structures, a role whose main responsibility is not to supervise tasks, but to safeguard standards, ethical, human, and operational. Someone who answers directly to him. Someone who observes the inner workings of the hotel, not from above, but from within. The silence in the room deepens. Some people begin to understand. Others resist the idea, but no one interrupts. Then Joseph speaks again. He says the name, Sarah. For a moment, it seems the sound does not propagate correctly, as if the word needs time to traverse the space and reach every ear. Sarah, who until minutes ago was the dismissed employee, is now mentioned as the highest reference of trust. She does not react immediately. Not because she does not understand, but because she understands too much. She knows the weight of that decision, knows what it represents, not only for her, but for everyone who watched her being silenced, humiliated, and discarded. The promotion is not merely functional, it is symbolic, and symbols, when poorly positioned, generate resistance. Joseph continues. He makes it clear that this is not an emotional reward, not a gesture of pity. It is a rational decision based on something he considers non-negotiable: integrity under pressure. He explains that Sarah has demonstrated technical competence, consistency, and diligence over time, but above all, she has shown something that cannot be taught in training: integrity, when it would have been easier to compromise principles. He states firmly that he prefers to entrust the internal operation of the hotel to someone who has already been tested by injustice than to someone who has never needed to be tested. The impact is immediate. Management understands at that moment that formal hierarchy still exists, but moral hierarchy has completely inverted. People who once felt protected by titles now realize they are under observation. People accustomed to exercising power without responsibility feel the ground shift beneath them. Sarah remains silent. She does not smile, does not celebrate,
does not look around seeking validation. She looks at Joseph, not as someone thanking for a favor, but as someone accepting a responsibility. When she finally speaks, her voice is low but firm. She says she accepts, not because it represents a personal victory, but because she understands what the position demands. She says she does not promise to please, she promises to be fair, promises to observe, promises not to repeat what was once done to her. Joseph simply nods. He knows that her response confirms everything. The meeting ends without applause, no additional speeches. People rise in silence, one by one, carrying the uncomfortable feeling that the world has not returned to its place. It has changed. Sarah remains in the room a few seconds longer. When she leaves, the hallways feel different, no longer imposing, no longer oppressive, just hallways. She walks through them with her usual posture, silent, attentive, steady. Nothing within her has transformed abruptly. What has changed is the environment around her, now forced to acknowledge something that has always been there. Act 20 is not the end of the story. It is the definitive turning point. Not the rise of someone above others, but the fall of a logic that rewarded emptiness and punished dignity. Sarah did not win because she was promoted. She was promoted because she never needed to defeat anyone to remain whole. And in that hotel, from that day forward, no one could pretend they did not know it.
Change does not happen on the first day, nor on the second. Real transformations do not announce their arrival. They settle gradually, almost imperceptibly, like a fine adjustment to the structure of a place that has always functioned incorrectly, but functioned so long that no one questioned it anymore. Sarah assumes the new role without ceremony. There is no inaugural speech, no assertion of authority, no need to reaffirm the position with every gesture. She continues arriving at the same time, walks the same corridors, observes with the same attentive gaze as before. The difference is that now she is no longer invisible. In the first days, many do not know how to act around her. Some avoid direct contact. Others overdo the cordiality, as if trying to retrospectively make up for what they never offered at the right time. Some test limits, hoping that this promotion was only symbolic. Sarah notices everything. And she does not react impulsively. She understands something she learned far too early in life. Poorly managed power reveals insecurity, and she does not need to prove anything to anyone. Sarah begins by listening. She calls people individually, not to confront, but to understand. She asks about routines, difficulties, operational failures that have always been ignored. She asks how decisions are made, where people fear making mistakes, where they feel that injustice has become routine. She listens more than she speaks. For many, it is the first time someone in a position of authority truly wants to listen, not to punish, but to understand. This causes surprise. Some are suspicious, others open up cautiously. Gradually, stories begin to emerge, small injustices normalized, hidden preferences, imposed silences. Sarah does not react with theatrical indignation. She reacts methodically. She observes patterns, crosses information, identifies where the problem is structural and where it is individual behavior. When she acts with clarity. There are no public humiliations, no corrections made to expose anyone. There are direct, private, firm conversations. She makes it clear that mistakes happen, but power games will not be tolerated, that competence will be demanded of everyone, regardless of position, appearance, or history, that silence will no longer be mistaken for weakness, nor arrogance for leadership. The environment begins to change, not comfortably. Real changes rarely are. Some people resign, others are reassigned.
Some resist until they understand that the space no longer functions under the old rules. At the same time, something new emerges: security. Employees begin to make fewer mistakes not out of fear, but out of clarity. They begin to speak more because they know they will be heard. They begin to support each other because they realize that empty competition does not provide protection. Joseph observes from a distance. He does not interfere, does not guide, does not correct. He sees exactly what he expected to see. Someone who leads not by title, but by consistency between words and actions. Recognition comes, not in the form of applause, but in results. Reduction of internal conflicts, increase of efficiency, decline of complaints, a more stable organizational climate, and above all, something that does not appear in numbers: respect. Real respect, not respect imposed by hierarchy, but respect earned by consistent justice. Sarah feels it. She feels it when she enters an environment and no longer has to prepare herself emotionally to be diminished. Feels it when people address her without irony, without tension, without subtext. Feels it when the silence around her ceases to be a threat and becomes trust. Recognition arrives late, but it arrives solid. It is not fragile. It does not disappear at the first mistake. It is the kind of recognition that arises when someone understands that authority can be exercised without cruelty, and that firmness does not require emotional violence. Sarah does not become someone else. She becomes the same person in a place that finally allows that to be enough. An environment was transformed not because someone shouted louder, but because someone upheld principles when no one was watching. And for the first time in Sarah's life, Sarah notices something new. The world is still unfair, but it is not immutable. And sometimes, change begins exactly with those who learn to survive in silence and chose to lead without repeating the pain that shaped them.
The reward does not arrive announced. It does not come accompanied by euphoria, symbolic scenes, or words trying to summarize everything that has been lived. The reward enters Sarah's life in the same way that almost everything else had arrived until then, quietly, without promise, without spectacle. It settles in, silent, constant. The first sign is not at work, nor at the hotel. It is at home, on the table, in the refrigerator, which is no longer opened with calculation, in the cabinet, which is no longer a reminder of absence, at the end of the month, which no longer causes tightness in the chest. Sarah begins helping her mother without having to run mental calculations for every decision. It is not a grand gesture. It is something simple, every day, paying a bill before it is due, buying food without only choosing the cheapest options, solving household problems that had always been postponed because they weren't a priority. For a long time, everything was a priority, and at the same time, nothing could be resolved. Now the rhythm changes. The house remains simple. There is no luxury, no sudden aesthetic transformation, but there is stability. And stability changes the way a space is inhabited. The walls seem less narrow. The silence is no longer tense, it rests. Her mother notices even before Sarah comments. She notices when she no longer needs to ask how much something cost, when she does not feel the need to economize words to avoid worrying her daughter, when she sleeps without waking in the middle of the night making imaginary calculations. For years, she lived in a state of permanent alert, always anticipating the next difficulty, always preparing to lose something: the house, the food, her dignity. This state begins, slowly, to dissolve. Not all at once, not without resistance. The body takes time to believe when scarcity ceases to be a daily threat. The mind still rehearses old worries, but over time, the repetition of sufficiency convinces.
Meals change, not in sophistication, but in tranquility. The silent tension around the plate is gone. The automatic gesture of her mother pushing food aside, pretending not to be hungry, is gone. Sarah notices these details, the way her mother serves herself, chews without hurry, talks while eating. These are minimal gestures, but they carry years of absence. The relationship between them adjusts, not because love has increased, it has always been there, but because the weight no longer falls entirely on a single body. Her mother no longer needs to be strong all the time, no longer needs to hide fatigue, no longer to turn sacrifice into an invisible routine. For the first time, there is a real sharing of responsibility, and this restores something essential to both: balance. Sarah begins to plan. Not distant dreams, not grand projects. She plans the next month, the next year. She plans maintenance, security, continuity. Plans knowing that she is not just reacting to life, she is guiding it. She helps her mother resolve long-standing pending matters, debts that dragged on for years, commitments made in times of desperation. Each problem solved is not just financial relief, but emotional relief, as if layers of accumulated anxiety were being removed, little by little. The house ceases to be a place of survival and becomes a place of permanence. Financial stability does not change Sarah's character. She remains discreet, remains observant, remains choosing silence when noise adds nothing. But something changes within. It is not pride, it is security. She no longer needs to prove her value every day to justify her existence. She no longer lives with the sense that any mistake could cost everything. This does not make her careless, it makes her whole. The body responds. Constant fatigue diminishes. The tension in her shoulders relaxes. Sleep deepens. Sarah begins to live with that old fear of falling again into the same place she once left. Not because she believes the world has become fair, but because she has built something that does not depend solely on luck. The cycle of poverty is not broken in a symbolic instant. It is broken in repetition, in the repetition of paying on time, in the repetition of sufficient food, in the repetition of guilt-free choice. Sarah realizes this when she notices that she no longer thinks about money all the time. It still matters, but no longer dominates. It ceases to be the axis of existence. And this changes the way she sees herself. She no longer defines herself only by what she resisted, nor by what she endured, nor by what was denied. She defines herself by what she builds. Her mother, little by little, also changes. She smiles again without hurry, talks about things beyond survival, makes small but her own plans. There are no emotional speeches between them. There never were. The bond was always built more through gestures than words. Now those gestures are different, lighter, less defensive. Sarah realizes that by helping her, she is not just paying an invisible emotional debt. She is returning something that was taken too early, the chance to live without constant fear. Dignity, which for so many years had to exist only as internal resistance, now finds concrete support. She no longer needs to sustain it solely with emotional strength. She has a foundation, structure, continuity. And this transforms everything, without spectacle. Sarah does not celebrate, does not announce, does not turn her own story into a showcase. She simply lives. Lives knowing the path was long. The cost was high. Nothing was given. But now, the present does not demand extreme sacrifice just to exist.
What was left behind was not just a sequence of events. It was a silent, almost invisible process, as true transformations often are. Nothing there happened spectacularly. There were no fiery speeches along the way, no dramatic gestures that drew attention. There was consistency. There were choices made when no one was looking. There was character sustained on the days when it would have been easier to give up. Life, in the end, does not respond to noise. It does not bend to haste, nor to despair, nor to the need to prove something to the world. Life observes, and while observing, it tests. It tests what someone does when treated with indifference. It tests what someone preserves when they lose everything that seemed secure. It tests, above all, who someone decides to be when they receive nothing in return. Sarah was never rewarded at the right time. She was never validated when she needed it. When she succeeded, the merit was diluted. When she erred, or when they made her err, the blame came entirely. Yet she did not become bitter. She did not become what had hurt her. She did not use pain as an excuse to lose her integrity. Her silence was not passivity. It was restraint. It was choice. There is a profound difference between silence and submission. Sarah's silence was vigilant. It was a silence that observed, that learned, that waited for the right time, not to strike, but to remain whole. In a world that demands immediate reaction, she chose conscious response. In an environment that encouraged competition and humiliation, she maintained dignity. In a structure that rewarded appearance and status, she upheld values. And this exacts a high price. Being correct when no one acknowledges it is exhausting. Being integral when everything invites corruption is painful. There are nights when the sense of injustice weighs on the chest like a physical burden. There are moments when the question arises, inevitable, is it worth it? Not as provocation, but as legitimate fatigue from carrying more than one should. What almost no one sees is that character is not an ornamental virtue. It does not exist to be displayed. It exists to support someone when everything around fails. When titles disappear, when recognition does not come, when people disappoint. Character does not prevent the fall, but it prevents internal corrosion during the fall. Sarah's journey was not a rapid ascent, it was a crossing, and true crossings change those who traverse there. In the end, she was not just someone in a higher position, she was someone more solid, more aware of her limits and her value, less dependent on the approval of others, less vulnerable to the cruelty of others, more whole. Perhaps the hardest aspect to accept is this: not all pain is resolved with immediate justice. Some wounds receive no public repair. Some humiliations are not disproved in the moment. And yet, there is something that organizes itself silently in the backstage of life, not as a magical reward, but as a natural consequence of choices sustained over time. Sarah's silence did not erase her voice, it matured it. When she was finally heard, her words did not need to be loud, they needed to be true. And truth, when it finds space, does not shout, it asserts itself. This is not a comfortable closure. It does not promise that everything will always go right. It does not claim that every effort will be recognized. It does not guarantee perfect endings. What it suggests is something more subtle and demanding, that there is a difference between winning and remaining dignified, and in the long term, that difference shapes destinies. Now, the story steps away from her and approaches those who observe, because on some level, everyone carries similar experiences. Situations in which they were misunderstood, moments in which they gave their best and received indifference, phases in which silence seemed the only possible defense. The question that remains is not about what the world will do. It is about what each person chooses to preserve when the world fails. What do you maintain when no one acknowledges it?
What do you refuse to lose, even when it would be easier to yield? What kind of person do you continue to be when there is no applause, no protection, no guarantees? Some stories end with visible achievements. Others end with something rarer, intact integrity. And although this does not make noise, it is what sustains everything that comes after. Silence, when chosen consciously, is not weakness, it is a root, and roots do not appear, but they are what prevent everything from collapsing.
If you enjoy stories that touch the heart, provoke reflection, and stay with you even after the video ends, subscribe to the channel. Your support helps these stories reach more people. If this video resonated with you, like it and share it with someone who might need to hear this story. See you next time.